tonight I'm just thrilled to have you all here. Thank you so much for speaking tonight on this super important topic. This is hopefully the first of many HOS presentations that we host. Tonight we are talking about, is your shelter team ready to support families in a housing crisis? And as we know, housing issues have been on the top of our lists for reasons for pet relinquishment in the US and across the world. But the current housing crisis resulting from the pandemic threatens to increase owner surrenders. So is your front desk team prepared to handle increased intake from pandemic-related evictions and housing issues? We will learn from some experts tonight who have helped put together our Keeping Families Together toolkit. I want to shout out especially to the association and the Humane Society of the United States for co-sponsoring the toolkit that we did put out and helping us put these great tools together. So thanks so much. And tonight we have Catherine Chenier and Amanda Arrington, who will introduce the rest of our speakers, but two of my personal heroes. All of the work that you've done for this movement has been amazing. So I'm a little bit nervous introducing the two of you, but excited to have you here. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Rory. And my name is Catherine Chenier, and I'm with the Association for Animal Welfare Advancement. And Rory, you will just pay me like $10 later about my name mispronunciation. But we are really happy. The association is so happy to partner with the HOS Project and Pets for Life at the Humane Society of the United States on this eviction response toolkit. We love the level of collaboration and are honored to work with such wonderful colleagues. So Amanda and I will be your moderators for this webinar. What that means is we really encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And as we go along, Amanda's going to be answering some of those questions as best she can. And then I'll be asking the panelists questions that come up in the chat that we really want to give the panelists a chance to offer their insights. So thank you all for being here. And thank you, Rory, and everyone at American Pets Alive for hosting this webinar. And I can't wait to see how this next hour goes. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my very good friend, Amanda Arrington, who is also my personal hero as well.
We have so much love going back and forth. I love it tonight. I'm so happy to be here with everybody. And I have the honor to introduce our speakers tonight. I know that you all are going to learn so much from their experience and what they have to share. You're first going to hear from Aaliyah Simpson, then from Michelle Quigley, and then from Liana Moss. Aaliyah is the Pets for Life Marketing and Communications Program Manager and an avid cheerleader for the Human Animal Bond. Her 15 years of experience in animal welfare have given her an in-depth perspective of the underlying systemic issues in communities that can create challenges for both humans and animals. Throughout her career, she's worked with various animal welfare organizations. We're very lucky to have her now on the Pets for Life team. She's worked to develop and advocate for programs that improve pet owners' access to care and promoting DEI initiatives within animal welfare. She was the founding manager of the intake and surrender prevention effort at Animal Care Centers of New York City. And there she created initiatives using a human-centered framework that she'll talk about some tonight, that encouraged employees and clients to maintain a sense of agency while improving access to veterinary care, behavior training, supplies, and human-based services. And then you're going to hear from Michelle Quigley. She has over 25 years of experience in the field of animal welfare and shelter operations. She has served at a high-level leadership positions for both municipal government animal care and control agencies, as well as several nonprofit animal welfare organizations. Her background includes expertise in animal cruelty investigations, dangerous animal proceedings, shelter operations, disaster preparedness, and government relations. So basically everything. Michelle is often sought after for her knowledge and understanding of state and local laws pertaining to animal welfare and public safety. After 2 decades and a successful career in California, Michelle decided to take her passion of animal welfare to the East Coast. And she's now in Vero Beach, Florida, where she's currently providing her knowledge and expertise to the Humane Society of Vero Beach in Indian River County. She serves as the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Community Response and collaborates with local government officials to help advance the county's animal laws and regulations and to provide internal and external education to support current best practices in animal welfare there. She has a BS in Criminal Justice Administration and is a former sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, where she received numerous awards, medals, and merits for her dedication and commitment to service. And then you'll hear from Liana Moss. She is currently the Human Animal Support Services Keeping Families Together Implementation Coordinator, which may be the longest and best title ever with American Pets Alive, where she helped create the Eviction Response Toolkit along with HSUS and with the association. Previously, she was the Community Outreach Specialist at Pima Animal Care Center in Tucson, Arizona, where she worked with people experiencing homelessness and those facing extreme poverty to keep people and pets together and to provide support services for people to care for their pets. So you have 3 wonderful speakers who are going to share a lot of great information for you. Like Catherine said, I'll be trying to answer questions in the chat as we go, and the ones we don't get to, we'll present to the speakers at the end. So I will now turn it over to Aaliyah.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm so happy to be able to talk to you about this very important topic. So once our slideshow begins.
All
right, perfect. All right, I think we're gonna hit next slide. Yep, and then we're gonna go to next. Here we go, perfect. So I'm going to talk to you about empathetic access to care. So just before we begin, it's really important to note that we want to, if we can go back when we're perfect, thank you. So we want to make sure that we're providing empathetic and culturally competent access to care while doing all of the wonderful things we're going to talk to you about today. It's also important to realize that most animal welfare professionals, we are not actually social workers, and that's okay. And it's a very important distinction. But what we are going to focus on is how we can engage with our clients so that we can build trust and help connect them to resources that will best help their family and their pets. And that first part that we're going to talk about is cultural awareness. So cultural awareness, so culture is really important to everyone, right? Culture is one of the ways that, and one of the mediums which we develop resilience. It's also the way that we navigate our world, and it provides validation. And our coping skills, which is why it's really important before you build any program that you make sure that your organization has an awareness of the cultures that make up your community. Make sure that you make a point to understand that cultural composition. You can look around, you can do that by looking for at data, things, US Census reports, and then also that helps too if you are in the community and talking to local representatives. It's also a great way to make sure that you have staff that reflect the community that you serve. It also helps as we build a more equitable animal welfare field to make sure that we are hiring people that reflect this culture of this community that we serve. It also helps that to have people in your organization that understands the cultures around you, so that way they can understand how to navigate and how to have the best communication possible. We also want to make sure that it's not just enough as a one-time thing. You need to make sure this is ongoing cultural awareness training. That's for all levels of staff, including volunteers, administrative staff, management staff, and all the way up to leadership and your board members as well. And the way that you do this too is by looking into your current community and seeing what other nonprofits have available. Animal welfare is a social service, so working with other human-based social service organizations can connect you to those resources. And you can also look at some of the references of the toolkit as well. Right, next slide. So another thing that we want to make sure before providing any resources for a client is making sure that they are in a safe space. And this is both a physical safe space and a mental and emotional safe space. Physically, I think is one of the more easier ones for us to navigate and understand. You want to make sure you try to remove physical barriers between staff and volunteers and customers. So for example, if you can have a room, like a separate room where the two of you can talk. Sometimes when that space challenge, you kind of, or if you're doing programs where you're out in the field or interacting with clients experiencing homelessness, that space can even be just like a physical. So let's move, maybe instead of staying in the lobby or maybe staying in a room full of, or in an area full of people, moving away to the side. So that way you and that person can have more of a personal conversation. I always like to tell the time of doing, when I did this work in New York City, if everyone knows about New York City, space is a luxury. It's not a lot there. So there were some times where we'd have to, and even with that limited space, we tried to change the layout. But sometimes there were times where we had a lot of people at one time. So that space was literally, let's go into a corner and talk about it in a way, and and use quieter voices, or let me lean in to where you're comfortable. Again, just trying to make sure that person feels that they are, that they have that space to communicate and that they will not be judged, and it's a place where they feel safe. You also want to make sure that you avoid discussing private matters in the front desk area. And that is really huge. A lot of people may not give you all the information that they need if they feel there's an audience around them. Also, sometimes our defense mechanisms are different when there's an audience around us. So it's really important to make sure that it's private, that they feel safe and that they feel secure, and that we can think of creative solutions. Maybe that's borrowing a desk, or maybe that's reconfiguring or making cubicles. I've seen some pretty creative solutions out there. Next slide. So establishing that connection. It's also important to recognize that before especially doing something like eviction, this is a crisis for a person. And it's important to know that not everyone is able or feels comfortable trusting someone with in such a high crisis time. So in order to build that, we need to make sure there's that connection, so that way they can make sure that they trust the organization and trust the person that they're working with. And the way we build that is through storytelling and through trying to make yourself as relatable as possible. And the first step is introducing yourself. Making sure that when they come, that you say your name, or if you're going door to door, the organization that you work with. It could be just as simple as, "Hi, I'm Aaliyah. I'm with Pets for Life. How are you today?" Making sure that they know your title as well. Using door openers is key. So a door opener is a generally positive, non-judgmental response made through the initial phase of contact. Examples could be such as, "What brings you in our care center today?" Or, "Tell me what's going on with Fluffy." Or you can say something as, "Can you say more about that?" Those sentences show that that it's positive and you're trying to encourage conversation in a way that shows that you're interested in how that person feels and what they think about. You want to make sure that you're using minimal encouragers. So sometimes when you're in a conversation, these are interactions that are brief, supportive statements that convey attention and understanding. When using these, it reinforces again that person that you are understanding and you're listening and you are participating in the conversation to learn and understand, not to judge. That can be, as when someone's talking to you, you can say, "I see," or "Okay," or "I hear you." And that goes closely into active listening, which is making sure that you're paying close attention to what your client is saying and that you're listening to understand, not to respond. Sometimes in animal welfare, and really in any field where you're helping people and pets, we have so much information and we want to just share it with you and we want to give you all the supplies possible, but that can make the person feel more like a statistic or that they're not unique, and then they're less likely to engage. So you really want to make sure that you're understanding their unique situation and how they personally feel before providing any additional information. Next slide. So sometimes we have clients that come to us and they are dealing with what we call really strong emotions. So that can be that someone is really upset, or they're experiencing extreme fear or panic, or they're agitated, or they're too disoriented to talk. And this can be where it can be most difficult for sometimes our front desk clients and for anyone that gets involved. But the important thing is to try to make sure that we can work with this person to get them down to get their anxiety down to a level that we can interact. The first one is trying to just address the primary concern. Rather than encouraging them to calm down, just to help the person focus. So, if someone's upset, like, "Oh, like, let's see what we can do about how we can try to keep you and Fluffy together," or just make sure we're pivoting to while we're there at this time. Sometimes just providing a supportive presence. Sometimes letting the person have a time to just sit and you remain nearby and show that you're available. Or if the person's asking for space, you can say, "Okay, I'll just be right outside here. And if you need me, just I'll come back in a few minutes and check in," just so that they know there's someone there as they have time to collect their thoughts. Offering something tangible can help as well, just to kind of refocus. So offering a tissue or drink of water, or just or handing someone a pen or a form to fill out, just giving someone something to do in order to help assess. And again, that depends on the situation. You can enlist support too if someone has family or friends nearby, and you can engage them as well. Sometimes that helps as well too, to have other familial support. And you can help provide focus by focusing on specific manageable feelings, thoughts, and goals. So it could be like, today, let's just fill out this paperwork. Or it can be, so I need this phone number. Would you be able to provide that for me? Just giving small, like breaking it up into smaller, bite-sized, easily tangible goals can sometimes help someone navigate through that crisis. And it's really important to remember that when people are going through a crisis, sometimes they can be pushed over their threshold. A few of us who, are in animal welfare, we know about animal behavior. We know about when they're over thresholds, sometimes they're not the best versions of themselves. We're also social animals, and we do the same thing. So it's really important to note that just because someone is upset or angry, that does not mean they're no more or no less deserving of your help. So we want to just still make sure that we can engage with them and still provide them the exact same resources that we would, even if they were had behaviors that we felt were pleasant. So, right, next. Partnerships and referrals are so key in this work. We cannot do it on our own. So you want to make sure that all your staff and volunteers are well aware of the community-based resources that are available. That, again, I'll say it over and over again, we are a social service, so we need to work with other social services. That can be food banks, domestic violence programs, housing services, other social workers. Community organizers are so key, especially in a community, because they're really like the trusted officials of that community. And if you can work with them directly, not only will you be able to get access to other resources, but you'll also be able to build that trust within the community. And that includes faith-based organizations. And that goes back into that cultural competency of understanding your community and who are those key centers of support in your neighborhoods. And additional animal welfare services as well. Sometimes that's both nonprofit and for-profit. Sometimes trainers, groomers, and other for-profit organizations will help out if we talk to them about our mission and what we're trying to accomplish. It's really important, though, that you reach out to these organizations ahead of time and gather this information. So on the process of referral, on the cost, on the time constraints, and on their program limitations. This way that when we do start to refer people to them, we can make sure that we're sending those organizations that we're working with the best possible person that they can help, and that we're also not wasting time and also discouraging people who are trying to find resources. So if it's, you can have a list, but you don't want to make sure, you want to make sure that you're not just handing out a list to clients, so here you go. If you are really down for time constraints, at least circle with, you should know at least 3 solid resources in your community that you mostly use, and know all the ins and outs of how to navigate those. Start there, and then that will usually start to help your referrals. Next slide, please. All right, communication is key to success. This is also communication between you and the client, and you and the client, you and the client, you and other partners that you're using. It's really important to recognize that when people are experiencing a crisis, it's important to have multiple methods of communication if possible. That means alternative contacts, text, emails, a day, time, and location to meet if they are experiencing homelessness, they don't have that. Typical 9 to 5 hours probably will not work. And you got to have room for flexibility. Navigating a crisis can cause unexpected conflicts in schedule, and build room for that flexibility. So for example, while it's great if we can say, let's have a check-in while we're fostering Fluffy every Tuesday at 3, it's also important to recognize that they might not be able to make Tuesday at 3 if they're trying to find, if there's a showing for an apartment that day. So make sure that you have a way for they can contact you to let you know if you're not going to be there. Make sure that if there is that flexibility, that they have other times they can that they can call, you can schedule, and make sure that there's multiple people aware. So have some kind of note in a system so that whoever is available at that time, if they do call, will know what's going on exactly. A great way of doing that is keeping notes inside of any sheltering system that you use connected to that person. You want to make sure that you're providing realistic timelines too. For example, evictions will take longer than 2 weeks for someone to find a place. So you want to make sure that we are giving a realistic time for how we can hold the animal. So if so look at that in your community. If you know that there's a really low market of pet-friendly, low-cost housing, which I think is the case everywhere, we might need to navigate in our system. What do we do if it takes 2 to 3 months, and do we have a plan for that? Are our fosters aware? Do we have that capability to house? Those are all really important questions when doing this work. And this communication should be through between the organization and the pet owner. It's really important to try to, in this program, to not have that communication be from a foster parent to the owner. You really want, the organization wants to be the middle person in that scenario, just to make sure that we're tracking all communication and we're fully up to date on what's happening. And then 2 is to make sure that all the information that's provided both ways is factual, and that we are able to, and that we're not making promises that we can or cannot keep, which is key. So next slide, please. And that leads into boundaries. It's really important that staff and volunteers who are doing this work understands that there is limitations of services that we can provide. And while we would love to do everything, it's also important to note that we should not try to fill these limitations outside the context of work. This can lead to unintended harmful consequences to all parties. An example that I heard someone mention before is that there was a volunteer who was willing to do someone's laundry for them. That can lead to a very slippery slope. What if that person's unable to do that laundry anymore? Then what will that client do? And again, it is done with nice intentions, but it can lead to unintended harmful consequences. Instead, we want to make sure that we're focusing and all of our support is rooted in what we can do. And what we can do is at minimum 3 things. We can provide information. So that goes from make sure that all of our information is up to date on where we can refer our clients and what things we have available to offer. And that way we can make sure that that person can make the best decision for their family, which includes their furry friend. We can link them to all the resources that we can, and that's referring them to other human-based services as well, and our own services. And we can provide that empathetic engagement. And that goes a long way by making sure that we are inadvertently creating, that we're not inadvertently creating more trauma. We are actually then still providing a big service and helping them towards their process of healing through this crisis. Next slide. And that leads to compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue is a really important thing to note in not only just this work, but in our field as a whole. For those who are not familiar, compassion fatigue is a combination of burnout and secondary traumatic stress. And this stress is caused by the emotional burden of wanting to help people who are suffering and pets who are suffering. You'll usually see this in your staff if you see like slowness of thought, difficulty prioritizing tasks. And there's a lot more information out there, compassion fatigue. But what I want to focus on is compassion resilience and making sure that that your staff is aware of this. And it's the ability to maintain our physical, emotional, and mental well-being while responding compassionately to people who are suffering. And this can be understood in our field as ability to maintain our physical, emotional well-being while having those barriers to their caregivers, while making sure that we are still staying empathetic and trying to think the best of people. And again, this all helps too, and it builds on having that cultural competency. So the more we understand people around us, the more we're going to be empathetic, and the more we'll be able to navigate and actually practice that compassion resilience. Next slide. Great, so thank you. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
1 second. Thank you, Leah. So we are going to talk about, for the next few minutes, support-based community engagement models, how we go from the punitive measures to support measures. Next slide. Like many of you probably on this webinar, I spent the first several years of my career on the enforcement investigative side, and I saw firsthand just how systemic poverty and structural inequity has created barriers in our communities just to access the most basic of care. So let alone jobs, food, education, and healthcare. We're actually talking about no access to pet resources and veterinary care, or even just some of the basics as food. What COVID-19 has forced us to collectively do as animal welfare professionals is to challenge the status quo. Let's take a look at what we've been doing for, dare I say, decades, and it's time to make a change. It's time to really look at the eliminate the divisiveness and the outdated protocols and legal statutes that really negatively impact people and animals, and that continue to enforce the over imbalance in resource accessibility. Next, please. Friends and colleagues, there is no better nor critical time to be doing the work we are doing. It really has long been time to transform our animal care and control programs from punitive to community-minded. We really need to reserve those actions for when there is truly a public safety and certainly an animal welfare issue or issues in front of us, not just jump to the, let's issue a citation, let's serve an intent to seize notice, let's take someone's pet away. We need to preserve the animal-human connections and those bonds that actually exist when appropriate. There will be times where enforcement actions are needed. It is not the majority of the time, and I think many of us know that, but I think it's good to remind ourselves. Next. Here's something that is pretty critically important, right? Instead of narrowly focusing on what this person did or what, instead of what they did, let's ask what happened to them to cause them to maybe be in the predicament they're in. What happened to this family, this pet parent that led to maybe this dog being so matted or tied up on a chain all the time, and what led them to that versus you did that and you need to be punished. If we look through that larger lens, I can assure you there'll be many circumstances where simple support, direct support would have solved the problem and maybe not have allowed things to get as far, where then maybe punitive measures are the only response that an enforcement officer is going to turn to. We really want to look at how do we go from complaint-driven animal control responses and really engage in the proactive outreach. How do we support pet parents in our underserved communities? We'll talk about that in the next slide. Really, I know that we can attempt to resolve most complaints with non-punitive measures. It could be like the photo on the top where we're simply providing food and bedding to a particular pet parent. It could be access to vaccinations. Maybe they just simply need a rabies vaccine to be in compliance with their local pet licensing program. These are really tangible things that we can do as animal welfare professionals, especially for those folks in the field that are dealing with the folks day-to-day, face-to-face. I think it's really time we all look inside ourselves, acknowledge that we do have existing internal biases, but those need to be left at home. And again, we want to focus on our non-judgmental communication and build our relationships, not instill fear. Have the folks look forward to you coming into their neighborhood, knowing that you might have some extra food on the truck. You might have some kitty litter on the truck. You may have information on where they can get their pet spayed and neutered, either for free or at a very affordable cost. And again, there will be times when enforcement is necessary, as in the photo down below. So save those punitive measures for those times. Let's help those kids, those fur kids, as I like to call them. Let's help these babies get in a safe and happy situation, but let's not break a bond that already exists when all the pet parents need or a family needs is simple support. One way to do that is really also look at working with our government legislators to rework many of those outdated, whether they're a state statute, a county code, or a local municipal ordinance. Some of them have been on the books for decades and decades, and clearly they're no longer relevant to the work we're doing today and to the situations that we're seeing today. So we have to tackle this on many fronts. I will tell you the most important tool that you carry with you every single day. You have it with you every day. It's your discretion, officer discretion. You have it, utilize it. You have a choice, make the right choice. We're going to transition to the next section, where we are realizing also that landlords are now targeting pet behaviors to circumvent those COVID-19 protections that have been in place. So what can we do as organizations? Granted, we understand you're not going to be able to do everything in this toolkit. It's such a comprehensive tool. So kudos to all of the folks that put this together and worked on it. But I promise you, there's at least one thing that all of us can do. All of you can do at least one thing. So here are some examples. So how can we support these families that are facing evictions when, again, the landlords are now trying to circumvent the protections? Let's provide a list of established resources in your local community. Let's develop a list of local trainers and behavior professionals that maybe we can refer some of these folks to. here's a thought: create a high level team of volunteers that can help, whether it's just email support, maybe a telephone helpline, a private social media group. So there are other ways that we can sort of tackle this and still provide resources. This eviction toolkit is loaded with downloads that are available to you that you can access directly. And this next slide is just a list of some of them. So many of our colleagues across the country have already been doing this sort of resource and support using some of these mechanisms, even pre-COVID. So they have done this successfully and continue to do so. So again, these are links directly that you can click on and try to implement in your organizations in any way that you think will be helpful. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next colleague.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, everybody, let me get organized here. So we're moving on to pet support services and support services in general. So I have two families here on the left. I have Maria and Dipper, and these are clients from Tucson, Arizona. Through doing direct community outreach, boots on the ground, we would set up once a week in a local park with everything that you could possibly need for a pet. So dog food, cat food, leashes, collars, harnesses, vouchers for spay and neuter, and then of course the connection for further resources for medical care. Maria was driving through her neighborhood, saw us camped out there and realized what we were doing, went home, grabbed Dipper, and after giving him a once over, we packed up her car with food. He was quickly growing out of the puppy food that she was feeding, so we got her all set up. And she was so excited that we were there. She called her sister and a friend who actually lived in the neighborhood. And that's really creating a connection to already existing community networks in the communities that we work in. People are already connected, already supporting each other. As animal welfare organizations, it's about tapping into that, making it known that we're a resource that can be accessed, and spreading word that way. Then on the next family we have is Curtis and Grace. Curtis was experiencing homelessness and had been waiting on the Section 8 housing waitlist for about 2 years, and got Gracie to train her to be a diabetic alert dog. Well, a big storm hit Tucson and it was extremely cold, and Curtis was 2 weeks away from getting Section 8 housing. So Gracie was one of our first safety net fosters that we did about a year ago, and she spent time with a foster. And when we brought her back to Curtis, we loaded him up with a huge pet support package with a crate and food and training materials, of course, spay neuter vouchers and vaccinations, so that really Curtis didn't need to think about anything regarding finding more resources for Gracie's care beyond us bringing him everything to her. So in our upholding a commitment to non-exploitive practices, we really wanted to share this story with you. And all people involved, I can't say the pets have, but all people involved have consented to have their story shared. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the strengths-based approach and asset-based community perspective, otherwise known as asset-based community development. A primary focus on weakness or shortcomings of a person or community just results in low self-esteem and hinders growth. It's not helpful. Whereas focusing on strengths helps folks resolve difficulties, develop their full potential, and it boosts people's self-esteem. We want to build people up. Research actually shows that focusing on positive qualities helps to build resiliency. And emphasizing people's and communities' abilities, values, interests, beliefs, resources, accomplishments, and aspirations should be the goal of all of us working directly with clients. So asset-based community development can be defined as people and communities can organize to drive the development process themselves by identifying and mobilizing existing but often unrecognized assets, thereby responding to and creating local economic opportunity. Not just economic opportunity, but opportunity for everybody to succeed. So every community, as we said, not only already has community networks, but already has community assets. We should recognize those, not reinvent the wheel, and partner with folks in the community to accomplish all of our collective goals. Everyone in every community has strengths. What are they? And then another focus that as Michelle and Aaliyah both have mentioned, is this focus on the human-animal bond, which is so, so important. I know that many of you watching have a pet at home, and I urge you to kind of think about your perspective from having a pet, your connection to them, and what they mean to you. The social, psychological, and medical benefits of having a pet should not be available or viable only for select groups of people or classes of households. The bond people have with their pets should not depend on income, zip code, race, or the language they speak. The human-animal bond is important to the health and well-being of the client and the animal client. The bottom line is we have better outcomes for our human clients and our animal clients when they remain together. Their mental health is better. You'll see animal behavior improve, and human mental health and well-being is directly connected to having that pet with them. And then we're going to talk a little bit about reaching and working with folks experiencing homelessness. Communication is key. Leah touched a little bit on communication in crisis, and I urge you to take all of those tidbits and add that to this mode of communication as well. We want to create a welcoming environment. That doesn't just mean at the animal shelter, because hopefully you'll be out in the community. So you should bring that welcoming environment with you. Take time to build relationships based on identification. Really try to get to know people, know their names, know their pets' names, try to get a little bit of their story, understand who they are. Oral communication style is essential for folks experiencing homelessness. That's the most common and efficient way that information is transferred from person to person. So we would encourage other organizations to tap into that as well. We talked about community networks, tap into that. Make sure we're talking to people, getting that information out. A 15-page pamphlet may not be the most accessible or efficient way to communicate. Again, we want to empower people by focusing on their strengths and skills. Practice empathy, not sympathy. Put yourself in somebody's shoes. Really try to imagine what their experience is like. And pity is not what we need in this situation. Always meet the individual where they are. This is both physically, like where they are physically, and where they are in their life, where they are emotionally, mentally. We need to meet them where they are. All needs are different. All individuals should be treated as individuals. Same thing with pet parents and pet families. Every situation is unique and should be treated as such. Everyone has the right to self-determination. So therefore, don't apply undue pressure by pushing next steps. Very often we see that with spay neuter, which is essential. It's incredibly important, and we always should offer that. But if someone's not ready, making sure we kind of work on their timeline so that we're not making people uncomfortable. And be okay with compromise. The amazing Pets for Life saying with Amanda Arrington on the call, don't let perfect get in the way of good. Next, we talk about removing barriers. And that's what most of our presentation is about, if you haven't gotten that. Develop a skilled team of employees or volunteers to actually go into the community and meet people where they are. I know that's challenging with coronavirus. There's the importance of keeping our staff and volunteers safe is paramount. My hope personally is that with vaccinations and social distancing measures and mask wearing, we can continue as animal welfare professionals to go out into the community, meet people where they are, especially in a time where things are so difficult and the world is so difficult. Develop relationships with local homeless shelters or resource centers to connect with new clients and maintain client relationships. They really will be your partners. They know the people in the community almost as well as everyone else. So it's really good to talk to them about that. I recommend confidentially, and the keyword is confidentially, mapping the locations of your clients because phone and email are very often not options. Many people don't own a phone or have access to email. With coronavirus shutting down public libraries, many folks have lost access to essential internet services that they don't have otherwise. So if you kind of know the area that folks live in or hang out in, you can actually, again, go boots on the ground into the community to find them, deliver supplies to them, communicate with them. You should also be developing transport options. This is incredibly essential so that animals can receive medical care and be returned to their family. Pet bans on public transport, very often pet bans for bully breeds or large dogs, prevent people from bringing their animal on public transit. People are concerned about traveling on public transit with COVID. There's very often no access to a private vehicle, and cabs, including Ubers and Lyfts and things like that, can be expensive. So you can either develop transport options where volunteers drive animals to and from medical appointments, or you can fund cabs or Ubers or Lyfts for folks. Another thing to think about is how you actually provide pet food. The key would be for it to be able to be stored. Very often folks won't have access to a refrigerator or a large backpack. So Ziploc bags for dry food is a great thing. I would advise kibble over wet food, but if you have to do wet food, 5-ounce cans are better to hand out than 12-ounce cans. 12-ounce cans are larger, bulkier, and once you open them, you have to throw it away. It could spoil. So 5-ounce cans, you can keep them sealed until time for use. You can also create general care guidelines for companion animal guardians who may not be able to access vet care, or you may not be able to assist. These are for extremely basic medical conditions, the common vomiting, diarrhea, cough, sneezing, pregnancy, weight loss, or weight gain. To give people a better idea of what they're dealing with, always with the caveat that you encourage them to see a veterinarian. There are examples of that in the toolkit as well. And on that note of providing medical support for folks that don't normally have access to it, you can build a network of veterinarians interested in and willing to contribute or partner during the crisis. Veterinarians are in the helping profession too, and they want to help. You'd be surprised. So absolutely encourage people to reach out. Also connecting with local veterinary schools for student and faculty support. Students are itching to get their hands on animals and help out and practice their skills. So absolutely connecting with them. I'm sure they'd be willing. You can subsidize veterinary care through donations, grants, or other forms of funding. Host or co-host a drive-through or stationary clinic to provide low-cost vet care, vaccines, microchipping, and licensure. And a great example of that with an incredible amount of in-depth resources is by the Casey Pet Project, which is in our toolkit. They have an entire toolkit focused on how to set up a clinic for your animal shelter or animal welfare organization. And finally, we want to move away from creating more barriers. Requiring spaying neuter documentation, vaccines, income verification, proof of government assistance, proof of licenses, only makes it more difficult for people to access resources for their pets. It reinforces an unequal, paternalistic, punitive power dynamic. People are just not going to want to access those resources. Build these things into the support system rather than require them. So by that, I mean, provide spay and neuter services, provide vaccines, connect with human services to connect with government benefits if that's something someone's interested in, but don't use that as a requirement. Again, you're just going to have people not access these resources. And then barriers created due to stereotypes create a cycle of inequity and lack of information, again, perpetuating that cycle. We also want to acknowledge that not all animal welfare organizations will be able to implement all the programming we've talked about today. We absolutely understand that. Staff time and funding is limited before COVID, and it's limited now to a greater extent with COVID. That's okay. You can start implementing one program at a time on a scale that works for your organization. That could even be just handing out leashes to folks in the area if you have a leash law, or handing out a couple bags of dog food to start. Many of these services are very easy for shelters to provide and will support families in staying together. There's great resources in the toolkit about how to fundraise both monetary donations and physical donations to get these programs started and get them off the ground. It's more expensive to house an animal in the shelter than it is to provide basic supports to families to keep their pets with them. It's the main takeaway we'd like to hammer home is that if you're a government organization or you're taking this to your board of directors, it will be more cost effective to support people in the community than to bring the animal into your building.
All right, everyone, that was fantastic. Thank you all so much. I'd like to invite the panelists to join on video so that everyone can see you again. Thank you, you did such a great job. Wanted to open it up to questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with, and I'm apologizing in advance if I mispronounce your name, but Micah Moss asked, what are some other examples of helpful community-based assets one can utilize? So any of you want to take that question?
I can just speak to my experience in the community. There's so many. Again, we just touched on the networks that exist, family networks, friend networks. There are usually support networks within those communities, and neighborhood support. Very often there are focal points in communities of gathering. Again, it's harder with COVID, but corner stores, local parks, there's very often places where people are together already. So making sure we share that information with folks there, or providing resources out in the community in that time. There's also plenty of other economic assets that people have. Language is a huge asset that people have. All of these can be harnessed to perpetuate a positive impact in terms of animal welfare on communities. And again, partnering with communities rather than what we would call parachuting, where you parachute in to a perceived problem, hard quotes on problem, and then resolve it from our perspective, when in reality, it should be the folks in the community, one, defining the problem, and two, assisting, if not driving, solutions.
Michelle or Aaliyah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm just everything that Liana said and more. So I think it's also, I think as you start to do this work and start to interact with your community, you'll start to see those assets itself. But I think one place that you can start is, one, kind of understanding the cultural makeup of your community, and then finding those the areas that where there is a lot of community gathering. For example, when I was in New York, like the Bronx had a very different cultural makeup than Brooklyn, and I've had interact in both locations. And so who I would reach out to and where we would start would differ. And so it's really going to be about looking to organizations, your community, seeing what great assets that are there, but every community has them. And the more you start to know them, the more it'll be realized.
Yeah, I just have to concur with my two colleagues here, but also remembering not to go in there like you're going to educate folks. That's not what we're there to do. That's not what you should be there to do. You really want to hear what their needs are and work with them to help drive the solutions to those needs.
Yes, and kind of just like the way I like to think of it is like you're there to provide resources. You're not there to educate. You're not there to change. You're literally just there to provide resources.
Those are great answers and leads us to our next question from Vivian. She would like to know how other organizations have developed transport options for clients.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it'd be great if everyone wants to share their information through the chat. Also, in our toolkit, we have a lot of great information on that as well. So please take a look there. And that is really going to be community specific. Like if we could give a magic wand and tell you, this is how you do it in your area, we would, we promise you. But it's going to be, what are the resources you have? What are the volunteers that you have? What are any local laws that you might have? Like, what type of organization are you? It is so specific that yes, interacting with other organizations is great. Check out the toolkit. And if you ever have any questions or concerns, you can always feel free to email us and we can chat a little bit too.
Michelle, Liana.
It's okay. Yeah, I absolutely echo what Aaliyah said. For example, if you're at a government animal shelter, government-run animal shelter, you may not be able to physically transport human beings. You may only be allowed to transport animals. Whereas if you're a private organization, that may not matter. Your insurance may determine that. So as Aaliyah said, it's really going to be location specific, but there are plenty of options. I know we touched on them briefly, but there's community and volunteer involvement that could transport, whether that be humans and animals or just animals. You can subsidize cabs, Ubers, Lyfts to get people from place to place. If your enforcement has the capability, and very often they're way too busy and have way too much bigger things to deal with, but you could harness enforcement as well. And there are a few other options that we have in the toolkit.
All right, great. Billy Rose Harvey wants to know, how large are your animal human support services team? Do you have volunteers assisting with these programs?
I can go again if you want. That answer is yes. So I've seen it done so many ways. So for example, Pets for Life has we have a large team that in different locations that are focused on that on the ground community work that's mostly staff run. But I've seen other organizations too, even within the community that are Pets for Life partners. Some have one person that's on their payroll, and then they have it's volunteer based. I've seen other organizations where it is a team of like 30 people but they have larger space. It's really dependent on the funding that you can occur. Ideally, in an ideal world, you would have a full dedicated staff and volunteers to this work. But we also understand that in animal welfare, staff time and cost is very limited. So it's about working with what you do have, and we're going to start there. And while you do that amazing work, make sure you're collecting all the data so you can show the amazing work that you're doing, so you can bring that to funders as well, and to donors and to your board to show the need to invest heavily, so you can have a more robust team.
Liana, Michelle, any other thoughts?
Yeah, to just echo again with what Aaliyah said, it starts with one, if that's all you can do, and then build from there. But I think telling the story and showing the need is critical to hoping to expand those resources. But just starts with one.
That's great. We have a comment and question from Madeline. She says that one of the problems that they're experiencing right now is difficulty in collaborating with other departments, for example, animal services. Has anyone gone about addressing some of these barriers in setting specific boundaries?
That is a great question and comment, and it's very prevalent, and especially in areas where perhaps they're not as up to speed on current and best practices, or they're so used to doing things a certain way, or they only understand the punitive process. That's how I was taught. That was almost 26 years ago. But in many of our counties and municipalities, that's still the way. Struggling with that as we speak, and it really is just telling the story, showing the need, demonstrating that we can reduce the workload of these officers if they sort of implement a lot of these proactive approaches and not just punish. We're going to spend all these tax dollars on issuing people citations for having community cats or having a cat that is unleashed. Yes, there are leash laws for cats where I'm currently assisting. And let me tell you, it's a struggle. The struggle is real. And so focusing on how do we tell the story without telling people you're doing it wrong. Nobody wants to hear that. So we need to show the need, show why it's so important to evolve now and get to where the focus needs to be on the folks that need our help and who are classically left behind, our underserved communities. But it's work. It's exhausting work, and it can be very frustrating, but it can be done. It can be done. And we just need to band together here, work together, collaborate in order to make progress. That's in my opinion, in my experience.
Well, and I think that's a great point, Michelle, because let's see what other communities are doing and how they've navigated those problems. Steve from the Anti-Cruelty Society in Chicago is interested in finding out if there are other shelters that are using pet deposit subsidy programs. Is anyone aware of any shelters around the nation who are doing that work?
My fellow colleagues could probably name them. They probably know of a few. I know pet deposits. Oh, someone says Seattle Humane in there. I know pet deposits are a little bit challenging for shelters because with a deposit, you may not be getting it back at the end, if that makes sense. So very often there are shelters that will subsidize getting folks in for a month of rent or getting them in that way rather than doing the deposit. But it sounds like there are other shelters that are doing that. My colleagues could probably attest to that, but that is one barrier that we're looking to overcome.
I would say if you want to reach out, I think Aaliyah is going to share her contact information. We work with almost all of our PFL mentorship partners to help with pet fees and deposits. Most of the times it's pet fees, like Liana is saying, it's non-refundable. That's much more common than deposits. So we can talk about that and talk through how we've done it with all different types of organizations as our PFL partners and in different regions.
All right, we have time for just one more question. Tanel is having a little frustration because her local low income, low cost spay neuter clinic doesn't seem to be helping people where they are. So what advice do we have for her in terms of how she can really work collaboratively, and how can she recommend getting private veterinarians on board with this type of work?
Okay. It's similar to our other statement. I think it goes with storytelling. A lot of times when we have to remember, animal welfare for a really long time has had this particular narrative of that there's these individuals who deserve to have pets. Our job is to save pets from individuals who do not house or keep pets the way that we do. And it's going to take just as much time for communities to trust us. Again, it's going to take time for us to kind of move away from that mantra. And we know that it's important, but it does take time. And part of that is one, storytelling and sharing, and also kind of meeting people where they're at too. So I'm not sure of all the particulars. And if you want to talk more, you can feel free to reach out to us and reach out to my email is there, so we can figure out exactly where that part is. But I think the key thing is, what policies where are they now? What are their policies? And what are some things that you guys can meet halfway on? So I can use an example of one time I was working with a private veterinarian, and I asked, well, what are your non-negotiables? And what are the type of clients you cannot see? And so I remembered some of them, like, oh, well, I can't stand, this person could stand when people had luxury cars and still wanted help, which to me, personally, I'm like, that's not indicative someone needs help. But I had a few vets on our that we worked with, and I knew, okay, if I had a client that matched this description, I probably won't use that vet. But then, and after a while, we were able to get them to the point where they started to recognize, you know what, I'm helping so many people with this service. And then they started to change their mind, and then we were able to get on board there. So sometimes just meeting people where they're at too, and knowing what clients they can work with and which ones are not in the wheelhouse at that time.
All right, well, we are out of time, and something tells me we could keep talking well into the evening. Thank you all so much for bringing your expertise to the table. Amanda, is there anything else we want to talk about?
I just want to let everyone know that we're going to be following up with a document that has multiple resources in it. So some of the things that have been put in the chat this evening will be in that document, but also we wanted to provide as much current information as we could for all of you around the housing crisis that we've all been stressed about for many months, and we're still not sure exactly what it's going to look like. And with the new stimulus package, there are resources available for people: rental forgiveness, mortgage assistance. So we've put together a list of resources that talks through a lot of those details, and some different resources of how to find state and local organizations that are going to be responsible for getting that money out to people, so you can potentially connect with those agencies and then have that information available to people that might present at your shelter or that you might meet through your outreach programs. So we're going to send that document out to everybody very soon with with everything that we have so far, what we know. And additionally, with eviction moratoriums, what's going on with the CDC eviction moratorium, what's happening at state level. So we have a lot of information that we've tried to organize in a way that hopefully will be useful, and we'll be sending that out to everybody. Rory, I don't know how that'll get disseminated, but if you want to share that, just so everybody knows it's coming and they can look for it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all so much. This was an amazing evening, packed full of really super useful information. And as Amanda was saying, we're going to send out a document that you all have drafted with all of the links included in this presentation. That will go out in the email with the recording from this presentation. So everybody who registered will get that email with the link to the document that Amanda's referring to. And I just want to say thank you to everyone being here tonight, especially to our panelists and to Catherine and Amanda. Thank you.